My name is Rune Kier Nielsen, and I have written a book called Speaking on Climate. It's a guide for everybody who wants to use their voice to make sure that we get the climate action we need. And there is no doubt that we do need climate action now, and we need everybody who can to speak up for it, to push for it. We are in dire need, and it's in an acute emergency at the moment. But it's not just for the climate. The state of the climate is also affecting people. I meet a lot of young people who are climate anxious, who are concerned about the climate, but do not know how to speak about that, how to talk about that with friends, family, colleagues, fellow students. They are suffering from a phenomenon called climate silence. And when we are silent about some of the biggest crises in our world today, it's affecting our mental health, but it's also affecting the climate because we're not getting the action that we need. So I used my background, my degree in cultural anthropology, studying storytelling as popular mobilization for social movements, and my 15 years of experience as a political speechwriter on issues of climate, to condense all that I know into this small book with 9 concrete pieces of advice for everybody who wants to speak up. It's not just about the ordinary rhetoric of it. It's also about how do you even come to grasps with the emotions that an important issue like climate arises in you. And how do you come to grasp with stage fright, the fear of speaking up? It's a massive fear for many people. So that's what I've been trying to do in my book, starting with the fact that, okay, so you want to speak up. What's stopping you? What's your emotions and how do you use them? How do you really draw in people to see the world like you see it? How do you use your own story? How do you affect them the best? And that's really the red thread throughout my book. Another one is that I see a lot of books talking about the perfect speeches, Martin Luther King, Barack Obama, Winston Churchill, some of the big speeches that really put the nail in terms of messaging and in terms of the times we live in, defined the world. Well, I've made sure that that's not the measuring stick I want people to measure themselves by. That's the road to climate anxiety and imperfection in everything. So I've made sure to point out what went wrong in the great oratories of our civilization, to make sure that nobody will ever be perfect, but that's okay. We can do something great, even though it's not perfect. So I really hope that you'll read the book. I hope that you'll use the book, and I hope beyond all that it will inspire you to use your voice for climate action at this crucial time. My book, Speaking on Climate, is a guidebook for young adults. I think it's very good for teaching, but it's also good as a present. If you have somebody in your life, somebody who's young, eager to do something about climate, hesitant to what that would be, maybe this book will be good. It draws on 15 years of experience, immense research and science into persuasion, climate, public speaking, rhetoric, and it draws on history, because that's where I think we need to find the hope. And then it draws on the fact that we are humans, and as humans, we are imperfect. All the examples are imperfect. The introduction of myself in the book is imperfect. My major achievement in climate communication and speechwriting is imperfect. And that's really important, because emotions is the major barrier for people to speak up on climate. And that's also the first chapter. It's really how to use your emotions for speaking better and not for stopping you. Because, as I said, our emotions, our nervousness, our anxiety is what makes us human. Don't let that stop you from taking the stage. Make sure that people feel it, identify with it, because they are fellow humans. That's what will make your speech have an impact. So that's the first chapter, really, using your emotions to speak better. The next one is your world view. I am a big proponent of speeches and speech writing because a speech is a chance for you to sit down and listen to someone and really feel what the world is like from their perspective, in their shoes. But that will only happen if we, as speechwriters and speakers, truly think about the words we use and do they reflect the worldview we want to reflect? Are we actually offering our own shoes to the people listening, or are we offering someone else's? So make sure that your words fits your worldview. Now, the next thing, chapter 3, is using the past for inspiration. A lot of climate communication suffers from the idea that it's all new, never happened before, completely unique. There's nothing to learn from the past. But look at dietary ideas, eating less meat. Well, our grandparents did that as a matter of natural living. Well, how about transportation? Well, it's not a lot of generations ago that transport and travel was something completely different. Using less energy, recycling plastic and waste. All these things are something that we can learn from the past. So make sure that people can't say, oh, we never did it before, so we can't do it again. Because we have done it before, and we can do it again. When you want to persuade, it's also important to extend a bridge, an invitation, to make sure that you think about who is the audience listening to you. What are their values? And do they even overlap with yours? If they do, and they most likely do, because as humans we're not that different, then maybe that's your way to persuade them. Climate action is not a partisan issue. It's about preserving the world we live in. Who wouldn't want to do that? What values would not highlight that, of course, we need to protect the world we live in? So it's a question about connecting those values to climate action, not about inventing new values or persuading people that their values are wrong. We also need to do that in a good way. And the best way to show the people that they can be persuaded, they can change, is to show them how you have been persuaded, how you have changed. Nobody wants to listen to some know-it-all who has always had the right opinions, but we do want to listen to somebody who used to be like us, who has taken those steps that we're longing to take, and perhaps have found that they weren't that hard at all. Somebody who has crossed the boundaries and returned to tell us what it looks like on the other side. So make sure to include your own doubts, your own journey, the path you have taken and how it has felt. Now, as humans, we can get a long way with rational arguments. Numbers, statistics, sound argument. But we are not always there when it comes to actually behavior. So one chapter I have, chapter 6, is about how do we affect behavior without actually talking about numbers and rational ideas. How do we go around that using nudging and herd mentality? Because the climate doesn't really care what we think. The climate cares about how we act, how much CO2 we are emitting into the atmosphere, how many species we are losing That's what matters. So let's address action and behavior. Once you have those issues at stake, it's really a matter of brushing up on everything. Now, I have seen a lot of speeches that tend to not really know what they're saying, having mixed metaphors, mixed pictures, mixed arguments. But you really want everything to be enforced, to reinforce itself. So that's why I invented the instrument, the ring, the one ring, direct reference to Tolkien, to make sure that you control the instruments and methods you use, the elements of your speech, that they all reinforce your message. That's the most important thing, to control what people are remembering when they leave. So use the one ring to do that. Now, a lot of people are listening for leadership. We are in a time of turmoil. The climate is suffering, we're suffering. We need leadership. We need people to sound like leaders. And since Aristotle 2,500 years ago, the art of rhetoric has focused on just that. So my chapter 8 is about listening to the science of rhetoric, learning from the past, to make sure that what the words we use, the framing we use, are actually reinforcing our message and getting people to follow us. So be a leader in that. And of course, you can't get anywhere today without thinking about social media, digital afterlife of your speech. So that's the last chapter. How do you make your message travel? And it's not just about hashtags, ads, and how to create a buzz online going viral. It's also about getting into the actual conversation people have afterwards. How do you make sure that your speech and your message is what will take up time in the conversations at the dinner tables afterwards, in the cantina, or in the sports club? How do you make sure to start those conversations, to break the climate silence, to collectivize our concerns, and to create the action we need on a broad scale? Thank you very much for listening in. That's really the rough rundown of my book, and I hope very much that you'll buy it, use it, and that we together can affect change and create climate action. Hello, my name is Rune, and when I wrote Speaking on Climate, I did so structuring the book and its arguments according to the journey, the emotional journey that I thought the readers would need. That's why it's not structured according to any particular subject. It's not structured according to a teaching guide, but more according to what do you need to know and when do you need to know it. That said, I do think it's very well suited for a classroom context. It contains elements from across the board in terms of subjects. There's rhetoric, climate, communications, debate. There's science, biology, geology, technology. There is history, social studies, politics. There's literature. There's all these different subjects that could easily benefit from this book. If I was to teach this book in a classroom context, and I have taught many students in classrooms in elementary school, high school, colleges, universities, if I was to teach using this book as a textbook, I would divide it by chapters. And I would do that because I do think that it's important to follow this journey if you want to keep the students motivated. I also know that many students are different in terms of how they cope with text and how focused they can be, depending on age and various other issues. So each chapter is structured internally to make sure that they get the point, the message, quite early, and then it's elaborated upon continuously to make it stick. So everybody should be able to quite fast reach the level needed to be in a classroom discussion. Now, chapter 1 in the book is called Stand by Your Emotions. It's about climate anxiety and anxiety for public speaking, and how those feelings are what makes us human and what makes us persuasive, because it enables us to create identification in the audience. I think this would be a great chance to sit down in the class in a safe space and discuss how does these things really make you feel. I think that would break a lot of the climate silence and enable people to talk about concerns, feelings, emotions, what's hard for you, what's hard for me. Are you introvert, extrovert? Are you concerned about the climate, or do you not really care? So making sure that people understand that they are different and that's okay. That should be the first point, the first element of teaching my book. The next chapter is called Be True to Your Worldview. In my idea was that it's incredibly important that each of us uses the words that best reflect how we see the world. That's how we can invite people into our shoes and see the world from our perspective. Create that identification. But that means that people have to feel, be introspective a while and say, okay, what does my world really look like? Am I living in a world of, small scale climate change, or am I living in a climate collapse? How do I really see the world? I think that's this for the older students. I think this could be an individual assignment, write a short essay about how you see the world and what words reflect that. For others, it might be a good time to find a partner that you are confident and that can create a safe dialogue, and then talk about it. How do you see it? Is it really that? Is it really a collapse, or can you really call it change when it's much more radical? Those kind of questions. So that's chapter 2. I would have an assignment in that area. Now, chapter 3 is finding inspirations in the past. I think this goes very well with the subject history. So what are we really learning about? What transitions have humanity made before? Have our community transitioned before? And what can we learn from that? I think that would be a good way to set the students free to really research what has happened before, what transitions have taken place and how, what can we learn from them. So that would be a research assignment, homework that they could use the internet and the library. I love libraries. Now, chapter 4 really takes us into the audience. It's about building a golden bridge built from shared values. So that's where you start to see the context of actually giving your speech. Who will you be giving it to? What's important to them? What do they feel strongly about, and how can you connect that to climate? So that's really a logical assignment, but it's also social studies, because what's important to any group of people, but also how do you connect climate? Climate will affect everything. Anything that you hold dear, climate will have an impact on it. And you have to make that logical link. How will climate change affect what you believe to be most important? So that could be an assignment in groups, or it could be homework, or it could be individual. It really depends on the age group. Now, chapter 5 is tell the story of your journey. That's again more introspective. but extremely important in public speaking that people feel you and the journey you have taken. That's why people come to listen to public speaking. It's immensely important in TED Talks, in TEDx's, in political speeches. So I think this would be great as an assignment where people really are standing up and just sharing their journey. So choose a topic, tell me how you have changed and what you have learned. What is your story in this regard? And I think that would be a great way for people actually to stand up in front of the class and give a very short story about themselves. Because it's not right or wrong, it's you and how you feel and what you've done and how you have addressed this topic. So in that way, I think it's very relevant for an early public speaking in front of the class, if at all possible. Otherwise, it can be in writing. Now, the sixth chapter is about creating commitment. That's really where I address the issue that climate change doesn't care what we think. It cares about CO2 being emitted, and that's something that we do. How do we really address do behavior? And that maybe rational arguments are not always what's needed the most. Sometimes it's another kind of persuasion that we need. And that's really behavioral economics, nudging, that kind of stuff that we're going into here. So how can we do that in speaking? That's chapter 6. Now the last 3 chapters are a bit of a polishing. So once you have taken the discussion in this chapter with the students about, is this a rational argument relevant case, or is it something behavior affecting, and how do you affect the change you want the best, then they should start writing the speech. And once they've written it and you've talked about what does it do, maybe passed it around so that different students can see what each other are writing, then you start polishing it. And this polish is chapter 7, 8, and 9. It starts with chapter 7, which is the one ring. And that's really where you refine your messaging, making sure that what you say is what people will remember, but also that what you say will create the change that you want, and you won't be diverted. There are tons of examples of speeches that are spot on, very good, very strong, but somehow insert a small metaphor that tricks at everything and, goes out of tangent. Blindsides itself. So that's where you start structuring the argument and the speech. That's in chapter 7. In chapter 8, that's where you get all the Aristotelian rhetoric, ethos, logos, pathos, and start sounding like a leader. So refining the rhetoric to be the best that it can be and sound as something you would want to follow. That's in chapter 8. And chapter 9 is really mostly about what happens afterwards. How do you make sure that the speech has an afterlife? Can it be, is it about social media? Is it about republishing it as an op-ed or something in a blog post somewhere? Do you want it on YouTube? Or perhaps it's just about making sure that the conversations the audience will have afterwards is really about this one issue. That's where you should, you can go into social studies and you can use social media as a way to teach this, but you can also talk about conversations and what sticks and give examples of speeches that have had a lasting impact on the conversations afterwards. Perhaps the students have tried to hear a speech wanting to create a change but not being able to afterwards, because they are, going back into their usual social circles. So those are some of the issues that I would want to highlight if I gave a classroom teaching on speaking on climate. And I really think you should. There is an enormous amount of young people who are feeling silenced on climate, who are feeling all alone because nobody's talking about what they think is the most important thing facing the world today. And in a time where democracy is under attack as well, what can be better than combining those two and saying, here's how you can use your voice, regardless of income, regardless of skill, regardless of age, to affect change through democratic parliamentary means on the most defining issue of our time, what we do with the planet we inhabit. That's speaking on climate.